Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here slightly early. Simon Lyons, that's quick. I'm about to be joined, and welcome everybody. Tony Lorenz about to join. Yes, good welcome and good afternoon, everybody, to our live webinar, Insta, between myself and Anthony Lorenz of Lorenz Consultancy. Tony Lorenz is who you're about to meet. Hi, Stephen. Has been a leader in private practice for approximately 50 years. One of the more experienced people I've ever come across. Hi, Brittany. Hi, John. In the world of occupational office, mainly office occupation, and we are privileged to have him today because he is at the forefront of all the kind of lease renegotiations that are going on. Hi, Robert Beecham. Welcome, everybody. Nice to see you all on a Friday lunchtime, although the sun's not shining, but hopefully with our chat today, we'll bring a bit of sunshine to the conversation, and hopefully it won't be too heavy. It will be quite light and interesting. I think, hi, Adam. And hopefully you'll find it quite enlightening, and we're going to be telling you what we do, what Tony does, and we will welcome, hi David Pearl, good to see you, and hopefully we will, hi Mark, and we are welcoming Tony now to come on board, and we should be sharing our experiences and hearing how Tony has been negotiating with landlords, tenants, mediating. Tony, good afternoon to you. Welcome. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you
Tony,
perfectly, and good morning, everybody.
Or just afternoon. We are very honoured to have you with us, Tony. And
Thank
welcome
you.
everyone that's tuning in. Jilly, good to see you after last night. David Fisher's here. Tony, it's fantastic to have you as a guest speaker. It's the first one I've done. Previously, I've been interviewed by Nigel Burney, who kind of set me up to do this from NL Properties. Really, really good friend, a good guy. And for us to have you at this point in time on board, where people aren't quite sure which way the office market is going. I mean, if I can just tell people a little bit about you and your experience. I mean, I would imagine you've been in the industry now for must be 50 years, nigh on 50 years.
I hate to admit that, but it's actually 54 years. I started on May the 8th, 1966 at Lewis and Tucker.
Wow. So I would challenge anyone to find someone with greater qualifications. Don, my partner, for greater qualifications than you at this moment in time, and your energy levels are amazing. So we are here welcoming everyone, welcoming questions. But to begin with, I want to ask Tony, in a bit of background. I said Tony's the senior partner of Lorenz Consultancy, and before that he was the senior partner of a very well-known practice called Baker Lorenz. So it's fair to say, Tony, you've always been on the side of leasing, occupation, rent reviews, lease renewals, tenant negotiation, mainly offices, but also leisure, and clients such as you used to have Sky TV, part of Comcast now, obviously, HFC, part of HSBC, more recently Goldman Sachs. You get involved with your team also with dilapidations, I know. So it's pretty much the full spectrum of on the whole central London office market. That's fair to say.
No, it's not really just tenant rep. It's landlord and tenant rep.
Landlord.
I started asset managing Lee House London Wall in the 1970s, before the word asset manager became a word that we all know today.
Yeah.
Right, so we're liaising with landlords, tenants, and especially a lot of negotiations with regard to tenants who are in trouble and can't afford to pay rent to landlords, and also acting for landlords trying to get rent out of tenants who can afford to pay rent. So it works both ways. We're mainly a rent review,
I
lease
get
renewal,
you.
and lease restructuring practice, but move over to corporate recovery in times of recession, which is my fifth one now.
I know. Right. So, Tony, what I think people out there are going to want to know, what is going on at the moment? We have a June rent quarter day coming up very shortly. I think from a landlord perspective, as you know, I'm an investment agent, Hypoxy. I'm an investment agent. I've also got a slight management hat on in that we have a sister company, as you know, called Metris.
Indeed.
So I'm trying to keep quite close to Metris, who have I think a rent roll of 300 million a year amongst all their properties, £6 billion portfolio. And the concern obviously is what sort of rent is going to come in? What can we expect percentage wise? We know that retail was the first to be really badly hit with CVAs, administration, liquidation, and part of our portfolio is based around pretty much central London retail. But how do we think the offices are going to fare?
Well, it's tough out there. The majority of our office clients, we've got quite a few in the city and quite a few in the West End, are nobody knows what we're going back to. At least with layman's, you know, we were back at work and you could judge on a daily basis how matters were faring. But by the time we actually get back into the West End, it will be September or thereabouts, even though we've been allowed back before business really starts. And you need a crystal ball to find out who's going to go bust and who isn't going to go bust. But I can tell you that the sentiment of the office users has changed. I have never known that technology could work as well as it does. This interview wouldn't be happening 15 years ago and couldn't have happened at that time. And I think
Well, we
we're
didn't
going to
have
have a
Instagram then.
and indeed, and that's exactly what I was just suggesting. And I think
Hi,
that
Josh.
most of the office tenants are going to work on a 70-30 rule, that they will have a lot of their staff who could be backing them up, can be at home. There's going to be social distancing measures which will need more office use. But I think if we judge this recession against layman's, where we handled Queensbury Household, Burlington Street,
Thanks, Liz.
and had 3 rent reviews either side at 102, 78 and 68 pounds a square foot, respectively, in a period of 6 months, I think there's going to be a rental drop. But I think that the recovery will be a lot quicker than layman's.
So, I mean, what I'm seeing. So, I have been practicing massively social distancing. I mean, today it's the first time I've been at home for nearly 3 weeks. So, I've been going to the office pretty much on my own. I think yesterday there were 5 of us, but we had massive distance between us, over 2 meters. So, we were pretty safe. And I'll tell you what I've noticed. I mean, I've been cycling in on a Brompton. I don't want to take public transport. I don't particularly want to drive, and
We're
I'm
getting a
quite
poor
lucky. I'm only
connection.
2.5 miles. Well, let's try and keep going and see how we end up. So, I've been cycling only 2.5 miles, and it's the weather's been incredible, which has really helped. Now, what I have noticed is the most incredible thing: Regent Street has been carved in half widthwise because they put these amazing cycle highways in, and up into Portland Place and all around London. I'm seeing them going to Oxford Street. So it seems that the government are getting us ready to get back to work and encouraging people to make their own way in on bike and back by bike, which is great for the environment. But these roads are going to get packed with cyclists. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people who have quite a long distance commute. So I think that's going to be tricky. So in terms of occupation of offices, hi Johnny Kessel, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. I'm hoping, Tony, you can still hear and see me, because I can see the connection for some reason is worse than yesterday. But how do we see going forward? Do we see that from our perspective as investment agents, we buy a lot of office buildings for clients that traditionally, until the lockdown, people were very closely crammed in their buildings, and there were a lot of requirements out there for expansion space. Now, what I've learned is that people don't really like sitting side by side before the pandemic hit. sitting side by side was considered on top of one another, lack of privacy space. And actually now they're saying, well, you can actually catch things from people up until a meter away. So we were seeing a change, and this has been accelerated by the way the tenants occupy buildings. In other words, traditionally back of house was really too packed, with front of house, beautiful meeting rooms, reception areas, etc. So with part-time working, and when I say part-time, probably three days out of 5, hot desking, etc., etc. It may change the way we occupy our offices. Is that how you would see it?
I think you're 100% right on that. Funnily enough, we've got 2 self-contained buildings at the moment, one in Headford Place and another which is 20 Upper Grosvenor Street. And we've suddenly seen much more demand for the actual traditional building as opposed to the modern office floor. I certainly think that amongst the real casualties of this pandemic are going to be the serviced office operators.
Would you say more the co-worker rather than the traditional? Because I can tell you something. My ex-partner, original founding partner, David Saul, who is a major partner in Business Environment Group, they operate 800,000 feet. Very interesting concept in that traditionally he would rent out his operation a third long-term leases, a third medium, and a third very, very flexible as cellular front door type offices, no co-worker. And he has had his tenants in place for a very long time, so he calls them his customers. And they charge monthly, and they are 90% rent payers. He's been collecting 90% per month. And where he is down is obviously on the secretarial services, renting boardrooms, etc. But he's very successful. And I'm seeing other people who have done lettings during the pandemic of that short-termism offices, could be 3 months, 6 months, a year. So I think people seem to want flexibility. They want to know where they're going.
Well, I think you're going on to 2 questions. You're going on to one question, which is the type of space which people will want. And you're going on to another question, which is the flexibility of users. There is no doubt that flexibility costs money, because if a landlord's got a decent tenant for 5 years and isn't going to get voids every 6 months, he can charge less. Flexible offices have always been 40 to 50% more expensive than traditional offices. There's been a balanced argument as to whether traditional stays in the 10-year lease with 5-yearly upward rent review stays, and I think actually both traditional and flexible offices can and will survive together. I'm very worried for the continuation of the of not necessarily your friend, but the kind of traditional co-working office, where I'm not sure that you want to go in and sit at a desk with somebody sneezing next to you, right? And we just don't know the mentality. The one thing I can say is that the demand for private space has certainly increased. And if you had, let's say, even a 1,500 square foot office floor, where you can have your own private office floor, you've got 2 lifts in the building rather than 1, and you can have social distancing, and you can spread out between you and look after yourself as a family. I think that demand, as far as space concerned, is ideal. Yeah. As far as term is concerned, short term creates higher rents, and so if you can budget for a 5 or 10 year lease, it's better value.
I agree with that. Very quickly, I think we should answer a couple of questions. Number one, Lloyd E. Harris has asked what's going to happen to spaces like MetSpace, Hannah, etc. So MetSpace, as you know, is a part of Metris. So MetSpace is they go in and they manage to let within 4 weeks, and they splinter floors. They do a fit out, landlord's expense, and they overachieve because they've given people flexibility. Really, it's plug and play, so it's all decked out, ready to go. And you would traditionally get 40, 50% greater, well, maybe 100% greater rent, because you've got all services included, you've got flexibility, and you've got a nice working environment. So in my opinion, and I'm buying hopefully a building at the moment with a vacant floor, typically MetSpace go 2,000 to 3,000 foot floors. That is the way forward. It's flexi space, flexi lease. Certainly in the short to medium term, whilst people recover. I mean, Tony, can you see the questions coming down? Iconic London. Um,
Yes, I can.
office space went down to 30 square feet per person as tech got smaller. Yeah, crammed in like battery farms, say chickens. Now back
I,
to 70
I
to
would
100 feet per
I
person,
would
which I would
be
go along with that.
I would be doing some analysis as to where your people come in from, because a lot of these people are one-man bands, right? And if they're coming in from as Richard Russell coming in from, let's say, Winchester, they've now found home space in a home space at home to work from. Those who are working and aren't furloughed. And I would be a little bit worried about whether the demand which they had pre-coronavirus will stay up. I think there is a demand, to put it bluntly. I have never known that I could mobilize my whole team, and I have an office in Hanover Square, and I could actually live, if I didn't want the pride of having the office in Hanover Square and also being just opposite the square to you, which is the most important thing to me. The answer is I don't actually need to pay 150,000 a year all in for my offices. I could live without them, and just have a meeting room.
Okay, Tony, I'm conscious that we've only got an hour and we're already sort of 17 minutes through. Chap called Michael Davis. Hello to you, Michael. He's got a question for you, Tony. Please, Tony, do you represent tenants or landlords more? So either, who do you represent more, tenants or landlords?
I
Don't
don't
you
really.
think representing both is slightly contradictory? I mean, I would imagine that you would comment back saying you're taking a point of mediation possibly rather than, I'm not putting words into your mouth, but how would you respond to my...
I would call it conciliation instead of confrontation. The mirror image of what we are saying from tenants to landlords should be mirrored in the way in which we deal with land on behalf of landlords to tenants. We happen to be probably about 80% tenant and 20% landlord. I am of the belief that landlords need to fully investigate the plight of their tenant. And if they feel that the plight of their tenant is such that the tenant is going to survive, they have to weigh up whether they want to have a tenant in their building or go into the market with an empty building.
I've got a question for you, Tony. So the Insolvency and Governance Bill, which is going through at the moment, so the Property Owners Forum have just used their local MP and lobbied Parliament on Wednesday, asking for an amendment along the lines of, to prevent, if you're getting a rental discount or holiday, they want to make sure the landlords get their rents before big fat bonuses goes to the partnership, which I think is a fair and reasonable amendment. In other words, why should the tenant, who could be making a big profit once back, why should the tenant benefit before the landlord gets any rent? In other words, they couldn't have operated without the landlord's office. And where I think we're coming from, as you know, my background is investment, is that what we don't want to do is alienate my clients because they are providing the building for people to operate their businesses from. If we lose, landlords, banks take the keys back before you know it. We're whoops, you lost me then. I fell over. I didn't fall over. My iPad's fighting me. So what we're concerned about is trying to strike a balance. What is fair? What is reasonable? Because landlords, on the whole, have an interest bill to maintain, and actually, some landlords are moaning that they haven't had much support from their banks. So it's a bit of a vicious circle. I mean, it'd be good to hear from everyone else on this sort of topic about.
Firstly, if I could just lead it, there is a tripartite relationship. There's tenant, there's landlord, and there's banker. Bankers have hidden under a bushel for the moment because they haven't seen how rents have gone down. If rents go down by 30% and yields go up and loan to value is 70%, then the bankers are going to get hit. Right, and I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. As far as the government is concerned, the government gave us 3 months negotiating time until the end of June. I think that an extra 3 months is an absolute necessity because it took the best part of 2 months to get landlords to accept that they're in the same boat as the tenants and realise how difficult some of the tenants' predicaments are. The bankers haven't really come into the fold yet. What will be interesting is when June quarter day rent isn't paid, whether the government gives a moratorium or not. A lot of tenants will not be able to pay the June quarter day because they'll owe the March quarter day, and then negotiations will really have to come in earnest. And if a landlord does want to litigate and serves a stat demand and a winding up order, it may well be that the tenant will just turn around and say, look, don't even bother to waste the fees. Where do I send the keys to?
Yeah.
Right. And it's a balance of keeping landlords, tenants and bankers together.
I agree with that. Next question, Ollie, I think his name's Ollie. How do you foresee this impacting deposits? In other words, the rent deposits and the profits test as company experience cash flow issues during this time? It's quite an interesting question because I've heard of a tenant yesterday saying they can't pay the rent, and then the landlord went and helped themselves to the tenant's rental deposits.
Oh God, we've had three this week.
How does that work?
Well, the landlord, most leases say that the landlord has to give notice before he takes the rent deposit. Right. If a landlord's got a rent deposit, that rent deposit is particularly in place for these type of times. There is nothing wrong with the landlords taking the rent deposit. There's usually a top-up clause in a lease, but right. But the tenant won't be able to top up the rent deposit if he hasn't got the money again. And the landlord is actually prejudicing to some extent his dilapidations claim at the end of the lease, because dilapidations are far easier to handle for a tenant when a landlord hasn't got a rent deposit than when he has, because the landlord has to get the money out of the tenant instead of just holding on to the rent deposit until the dilapidations negotiation is settled. So as far as landlords are concerned, I wouldn't advise you to take the rent deposit if you can get the rent. I would advise you to take the rent deposit if there's no other option, and if there is a top-up clause, there should be. Then the landlord should be getting onto the tenant and asking the tenant to top up the rent deposit, even if it's on a monthly basis.
Okay, I'm with you. So let me ask you something else. How have you found working from home? I know you are in beautiful rural Sussex. You've got a beautiful garden, which we touched upon yesterday, which boys and girls can come and visit you one day and we can interview at your garden.
We can do a party here. That would be great.
With equal numbers of men and women. But my question to you is, do you see, because of this pandemic, people altering the way they go about their work? That maybe is home the right... is the right environment for people to run small businesses from?
God, I wish I had a crystal ball. Let's call that my crystal ball here. All right.
Well, shall I tell you what I've heard? I'll tell you what we've heard. We've heard mainly from our office tenants that they're only looking at 70% of the space. I think there'll be, in the same way as Lehman's, there will be a very, very active agency market, because when somebody comes down from 20,000 square feet to 10, they're looking for offices. The guy who's got 10 downsizes to 5, the 5 downsizes to 2.5, and the 2.5 goes into service. So we're expecting an extremely active market. And funnily enough, when people are downsizing, then they don't feel the rent rates and service charges as much as they used to, and they're not as choosy with regard to what good value the space is, because if they're halving their outgoings and if the outgoings stay level, it's not the end of the world. But I do take the Lehman's statistic of the 30% drop very, very quickly either side of Lehman's, which took until March 2015 to recover. Lehman's went down in September 2008, but it did go up on quite a straight line. And I do see an immediate drop in the office rental values, but I think that they could recover quicker, because this is not a banking and economic crisis. It's one where people have been furloughed and not been able to work for a long time. There will be a lot of bankruptcies, but there'll be companies who take over their positions. Yeah. Okay. Next. Good answer. David Fisher. Hi, David. With very significant changes happening in the way offices and retail are now consumed, are we heading for a very significant reduction in commercial buildings? And how would we reduce commercial buildings? Is that to residential or just boarding up buildings? I mean, I would imagine it's location driven. Certain areas, the prime, where actually the investment market is still super hot, and we've been doing deals whilst under lockdown that we've managed to agree deals and actually get them over the line. And where we've found that the market is at its peak is very prime. You know, the Mayfair, the St James's, very good West End, very prime areas of City. And I think investors are treating this moment as maybe buying buildings that they couldn't have bought before, and vendors not taking a discount. So, for instance, we sold a property for a big client, St James's, as a lock-up shop on a pre-agreed COVID price. I think it was 2.9% for a lock-up shop. £3,200 a foot capital value. There was no price renegotiation, went straight to completion. Both sides behaved very well. And we've had a number of these deals where, because they've been so prime, there's been, and I think there always is a shortage. Most of the cycles I can remember, maybe the exception when interest rates touch 15%, we didn't really get a big flood of super prime property. And the only market I've seen that has really slipped a bit is, you know, Oxford Street, where the Zone A's have moved back. And
I think the answer is that when an investor is buying, he's buying length of lease and covenant. So he's number one buying the income stream. All right. And if you have an absolutely prime covenant who is not going to go bust, and you've got an income stream for 10 or 15 years, all right, then the property will come back. And if the property doesn't come back, it could be a development anyway. I think you'll realize that we were both involved in a property in High Holborn, whereby in the event of the tenant going wrong, the development, and this was pre-COVID, the development value was greater than the investment value.
Let me tell you, in my opinion, that building's worth more now because you've got 9-year blue chip income. Yields are compressing. I believe we've got the onset of negative interest rates. There's just been a government's gilt issued, a 3-year gilt, negative for the first time in the history of the UK, even since the Bank of England was formed 390 years ago, at 0.0033%. So that, in effect, has told investors, if you leave your money in the bank and it's heading towards there, we will charge you to keep your money in our bank. And people want a return on cash. So, in my opinion, anything with a 5-year WALT plus, a headquarters building or a quality office building, it will have yield compression. It will be much in demand. We have a number of very wealthy, high net worth clients that need to place their money, cannot leave their money in the bank where inflation is gnawing away. And the other thing, talking about inflation, is are we heading for high inflation? If we're heading for negative interest rates, sterling seems to be getting quite weak. It's gone weaker and weaker, which means as we import, so we're a nation where we import a lot more than we export, and particularly with the effects of a hard Brexit, it means the goods we're bringing into the country are costing us more, and therefore, translated, means that we are going to have higher inflation. So I'm not sure how that's going to pan out.
I agree with everything you said. A casino operator that we're acting for was asked to put his lease on a CPI basis. All right, and was really worried that the CPI could easily go. If we go back to 1974, we had interest rates, bank interest rates for 15%. Yeah. And if we do go into high inflation, the casino operator can't make that much money because people haven't got money left in their pocket to gamble. All right, and so they make losses against a CPI which could go mad. So certainly collars and caps on RPIs and CPIs.
I see a lot of 1 and 3s. Quick question, Tony, from Michael Davis. Hi, Michael. Question: would Tony be prepared to be some kind of government czar in an advisory role if asked? Well, you've certainly got the experience for it, Tony. And I would imagine the government could lean upon you or Treasury advisory committees. Some agents have been, of people you and I know, like Ian Marcus and all sorts of people, because they might need to know about occupational costs, about rates, how can they stimulate the economy? How can we keep London at the forefront? It's a good question. Would you be up for?
I think the best answer as I can give is that my ex-partner John Baker used to call me subtle as an air raid, and I don't think I fit in. I would love to advise the government with regard to
a good experience.
I would love to advise them. I probably
Would you work
can't
with
afford to.
could you work with Dominic Cummings if you could find him?
Uh, well,
Shall we move
that's what
swiftly on from that question? I
I
think
think
so.
where we can. I think we know where we can find him. Somewhere out in his car visiting somebody. Yes, I could work with those sort of people, and a lot of my clients are fairly, kind of institutional white collar clients. Right, we're not only on the entrepreneurial side, but unfortunately, the governmental system is something I don't agree with. Because if we've got to have 560 people who are actually ex council workers from West Bromwich East deciding on what this country is going to do, the whole system needs changing. And I think if the government changed, one could work with the government quite easily.
Okay. Next question. I think it's Gerds. We're being offered a freehold building in prime town centre location for a good price. The uppers will. I'm not sure where that question. Oh, here we go. Is it too risky to buy vacant retail? It depends where the retail is, what location. Are you buying for recovery? Are shopping centres located nearby? Is the region overshopped? What are the demographics like? I think there's a whole host. Is it a wealthy location? Yeah, it could be a great. I tell you what was interesting, Tony. Stretton's, who I'm working with a receivership on something with them at the moment, have been doing online auctions.
I noticed that, yeah.
It went unbelievably well. And I'll tell you, it's quite interesting because you and I have been, I suppose, over the years to many auctions, and you go to an auction, and it doesn't necessarily have to be property. And you get that adrenaline rush, you see who's bidding, it's all a bit of a pantomime. And when you're at home, you haven't quite got that same picture. You can't quite judge what the competition's like. And
I
I
think
saw a property the other day, I had a reserve at 1.4, went for 2.75. 1.4 is if that was the highest price it would have sold. To go from 1.4 to 2.75, quite interesting, and it could be
I
the
think
way forward.
I think my advice to people going to online auctions is if it's almost like going into a poker game where you call a hand which you shouldn't be calling because you get so much adrenaline on
Interesting.
it. And I do play
Interesting.
poker online, and I do lose money online, but I enjoy it. And online auctions are. You can get wound up at an auction. The most important thing at an auction is to actually put your stop price on yourself and hold to it and not get wound up, because you could end up with a property you don't want.
Vicky, good afternoon. Vicky Desange, good client and friends. In light of the protests for equality beaming around the globe, could you both explain what role you see diversity playing for the Rents Consultancy and Michael Elliott? Tony, you can answer that question.
I have no idea.
I mean,
I've always.
look. I think it's a fabulous question, and you know what? It's a very poignant question. It's the right question to ask now. But whatever
Well,
answer you and I
you
give will
you
not be
stumped
the.
you have stumped me, Vicky. Right, and I'm absolutely in favour of women in property. For example, if we call that diversity, I find them much
Women,
more.
women. There should be a lot more women in property. That
There should,
women are hardworking, conscientious. I mean, we've got a position to fill. I would love to find a good surveyor. And the other thing is that it's horrendous what's going on in the States at the moment, and it's right that attention's drawn to it, but it's almost after the horse has bolted. Where were you all before? Now you're all putting up on Insta and social media these signs. I mean, it is in today's day and age, and it's been forever with all ethnic minorities. It's not something I want to really get involved with now on this chat, but the world is changing. The world is changing the way we employ, the way we occupy. And I think there could be some very good positives back to a proper sense of value when this horrendous pandemic is out of the way and we all move on. And we all hope that we have a V-shaped recovery.
I think the advantage of dealing with women, just to mention it in property, and we have a lot in the rent review and lease renewal field, right, is that there isn't that kind of egotistical challenge that men have with one another. It's not about winning; it's just about getting the right result. And
Yeah.
I find the majority of women, and I had Catherine Souter, who now works for you, working for me for a long time. A
Yeah.
brilliant lady, and loved working with her.
She's
So
fab-
I'm in.
she's
I'm
she's
very.
fabulous. She's fabulous.
I'm very much in support of women in property, and I think it should be pushed much harder. As far as diversity and ethnic minorities is concerned, yes, let's invite everybody who's good in, and we need
And then,
quality people. That's all we need.
okay, moving on. Mo Alizadi, who's got a business called Best Call Mo. I must tell you, the most sensational cleaning contractors I've come across. Mark, I'm curious to know what Tony's thoughts are on the future of co-working spaces, namely the likes of WeWork or World businesses more inclined to surrender leases and switch to flexible offices, which we kind of touched upon, a little while ago. But Tony, just a few words, just to recap, not to go too long.
I was involved on the Goldman Sachs building, actually advising on a WeWork bid to take the building, and I'm very worried about major middlemen, all right, who can be outstripped by the landlords doing their own things. Landsec have got their own office business. Colliers have got their own, all right, and there's nothing magical about what WeWork
CBRE have
do.
got a big one.
The CBRE have got one. There's nothing magical about what they do it, except that they do it quickly and efficiently. All right, and there are quite a lot of directors of WeWork who've left to set up their own consultancy to do this for people, and I would be worried about running a WeWork type business in today's market.
Okay, next. Hi, CJ. If we were to invest in one major UK REIT today, right, which one would it be and why? And obviously,
Derwent,
yeah,
and
I have to
Derwent
say,
every day of the week.
Mr. L and I agree that we're big fans of Derwent. I'd be very happy working in a Derwent building. Their design, I think they understand what the occupiers want, and whether you are in sort of their Fitzrovia estates, Charlotte Street, Tottenham Court Road, New Cavendish Street, which was the original London Merchants Securities estate, or whether you're in Midtown, their products, you've got to say, is really first class. I mean, I don't know if you've been to their offices. Piercy designed them, super cool. And the other thing, CJ goes on, is talking about the Capco Shaftesbury. Now Capco have acquired the 26% stake held by Sam Tackley.
No, funnily enough, they've got adjoining estates, and I was involved
Yeah,
in Newport Court, which is the connection at the
yeah,
end of Gerrard Street with
yeah.
the Capco area. All
Well, that
right,
was the
and with it,
Bourne. That was the Robert Bourne block,
yeah,
wasn't it?
I cleared the building to get vacant possession, and then he sold it to Shaftesbury. I'd like to go back on Derwent for a second because Derwent just have a culture which works. I'm very proud to say that Simon Silver was my first office junior when I was at Lewis and
Lewis and
Tucker.
Tucker,
All right,
and I see. I live locally to Simon. I've worked.
I took on his best mate. I took on his best mate Stephen Collins, who's now with Mark Steinberg, as my office junior. But sorry, I took him with me when I left Lewis and Tucker in '72 because Philip Lewis said, if I take Simon Silver, all hell will break loose. So he was left at Lewis and Tucker. So Derwent was created by that relationship. And
Just think, it could have been you at Derwent. You could have been Derwent.
I've never been a property owner. I've never been mindful as a property owner. I prefer advising in the background, right, and let my clients play with the chips.
And can I ask you another question? With your long and distinguished career, 54 years, have there been many regrets along the way?
Not one, not one.
Wow.
There has not been one moment where I haven't loved what I've done. I regret that I had to part company with John Baker in 1999, and then we rebuilt the business and we sold it in 2001 to Larry Lippman. Do I enjoy every second of this business? Yes. Am I meant to work during my lunch hour? No, because I actually put myself in hospital by doing 21 days of 3 hours sleep a night to get ready for the coronavirus negotiation when a club owner phoned me and had taken £12,000 against 160,000 a week. love the business, love the people I deal with,
Do you
and
still do you
I
still
do
have
it
the
for fun.
same? Do you still have the same hunger and appetite that you had all those years ago?
No, not at all. It's far greater than it ever was. Right?
You and I are kind of in the same boat.
It just builds. The more you do, the more you want to do, and the more people you impress, the more you want to impress. And the most important thing is actually handling your negotiations for your own self-satisfaction and that of your clients, and to get the pat on the back at the end of the day. And if it's Robert Beecham does not agree with me. He always denies me, and he's
I think Robert may be watching old
I know he's watching, and that's why I'm
Bobster
saying it to you,
Beecham and
Robert. Robert,
Bobster Lorenz.
I'm going to say in public, Robert, you never ever agree with me. I do what I do because I enjoy what I'm doing, and the money is the money that I happen to earn, which isn't that much, is a byproduct.
Yeah. But look, you've got to look forward to getting up every day and going to work. And if you don't, you've got an issue. And as we know, life is very short, and this pandemic has kind of brought it home to roost, really. That from a personal point, I find that the lockdown period has been. I've been working quite hard, but it's almost been a sabbatical, and that we've sort of reinvented ourselves somewhat. I mean, you and I, who'd have thought we'd be on a webinar together, as you alluded to at the beginning. Plus, I've been eating super healthy. I've been training 7 days a week. I've been riding a bike everywhere. I love cycling. I'm not actually too looking forward to jumping back in my car. It's different from you living miles from London. Without a car, you're up the creek without a paddle. But anyway, going back to some of our listeners, Rob Simmons, hi Rob. With the ease that companies can arrange CVAs, so this is going to be a good question, I can see it's from Rob, and the government's measures to prevent legal action against non-paying tenants, i.e. we can't stack demand, etc. Are we going to see institutional and pension fund investors take a risk? Does that mean, is that a question, do we think institutions and pension funds will buy now? Because I can tell you that the institutions on the whole are out until the pandemic's over, until they've got clarity, because most funds are sitting on cash. So most of the work that we're doing, a few of them with funds, but a lot of it's with the super high net worths. But I think that was probably more for me than you. Lloydie Harris, Lloydie, can you do a part two? I'm not sure I've got the strength or energy. Oh my God, that's quite funny. The next one. This is like the chalet online.
That comes from my good friend Ross Friedman, who started
I just spoke to Aaron.
Ross worked with me for 20 years and still speaks to me, so that's pretty good.
Funny enough, we used to meet. So the reason why he's mentioned it, because Tony and I don't know for how many decades, used to go to the chalet for breakfast and lunch every day until Tony helped remove the tenants so they could knock the building down. But,
I did not help remove the tenant. I was against the landlord. Well, I hated the chalet closing, and the chalet was a fabulous way to for people from different spheres of the industry. I learned an enormous amount from Mark because I don't really understand investment.
You used to be on the next table, and then there was Richard Leslie of Duke Lease on the other table, and then often there would be Manny Davidson with his wife.
And always my friend Lawrence Davis as well, yes, who I love dearly.
Big Lolly, who's now Small Lolly.
Yes.
So Rob Simmons, off approach, and what will be the effect on secondary investments? So that was kind of the continuation of asking about pension funds, etc. When you couldn't stack demand, your rents, etc. Wiltshire Daniels, chalet, yep, did so. I really miss it. Funny enough, I think my waistline's gone down now, it's not there. Tubbs, what weighting between the sectors would you deploy with a 3-year view? That's quite an interesting one. And I would imagine we're covering all sectors: education, healthcare, office, industrial, retail. The weighting between the sectors. Well, the sectors that are damaged most and the sectors that are damaged least, well, obviously the retail sectors are damaged most. Our issues with retail, Tony, are, I think, the way we all shop may have changed in twofold. One, it's very easy to buy online, and it's not just going to Amazon, it's anything. You know, it's I've got to watch what I say here, but it's my wedding anniversary tomorrow, and I
Happy
managed to.
anniversary.
Thanks very much. Second time round, as you know. So I managed to get the perfect present for anniversary present for my wife, and it's just so easy to buy online to get delivered the next day. And I'm not saying I left it to the last minute, so I'm not going to get myself in trouble to admit that. But the choice, and in terms of pricing, competition, etc., even with John Lewis online, it gives people an easy way out if you don't need to feel and touch. And the other big concern I've got about retail is once we get back to work, what is the affordability? What do people spend? And we are not going to come out with positive GDP until the high street really starts to move again, are we? When people have money in their pockets to spend. So often we get out of a recession by spending in the high street. So my concern is, hi Scotty, my concern, Scott, don't you dare say anything to my wife. My concern is how do we get back to getting the high street booming?
Well, Donald Trump gave everybody $100 voucher to actually go and spend in the high street. It's going to be very, very difficult to get back to the high street.
Sorry to interrupt and cut across you, Tony. So Rob Simmons is asking a lot of questions. Rob, I know I haven't seen you for a while. It feels like we've made up for a lot of lost time, mate. What effect will be a pandemic clause have on rent at review? I think that's a good question. I would imagine that if the rent review predates.
If your rent, I can answer this one because we're involved in it. If the rent review predates any knowledge about the pandemic, then the hypothetical willing lessee wouldn't have known anything about it. He would pay a full market rent, and there is no effect on the rental values. There's a second situation that if the rent review is during the pandemic, which we've got on one of the casinos we're dealing with in the West End, which has a June 2020 rent review, then the hypothetical willing lessee is wondering when the roulette tables are going to spin again, which is forecast for June 2022. There'll be a discount. And this third
June
one,
2022.
None of the bars, clubs, restaurants, and casino operators are going to get back into their profits until at least June 2022. All right, that is the message that we're getting. So there will be a gradual build-up in profits, and if you're taking that over a 10-year lease, it's easy enough to work out the mathematics of that. But I think the real question was a legal question, and will there be the acceptance of a clause whereby a return pandemic would be called a force majeure, which would bring in which may be disregarded on rent reviews, that you disregard the effect of a pandemic. I have heard lawyers actually suggesting so far that we should have a sort of a force majeure clause in leases, and the state of California has now announced, which is even worse than that for landlords, that in the event that the landlord and the tenant can't sort out a deal in the leisure industry within a month, the tenant has an automatic break clause for the rest of the year. And whether the government...
That's a bit harsh.
It is very, very harsh, and I don't think our government will step in like that. But we must not forget that in 1974, I think it was, we did have a thing called the rent freeze, whereby if the rent went up from 100,000 a year to 200,000 a year on a rent review, the landlord was not allowed to collect the increase, and I think that went on for 14 months.
Okay. Next. So Ross has asked, what advice would you give an 18 or 22-year-old leaving education, going to property? Where would you advise them to go? I can give an answer to this and what I did. So I went in as a young man, and we were in an early 80s recession. And I went into a small niche practice called Michael Cooper and Partners, who I have a lot to owe them for, and I learned very quickly. And so, yes, I started in management and then agency. And by going into management gives you a very good grounding of how a property hangs together. I mean, I did everything from delivering rent demands late at night, which was obviously save money and putting postage stamps on, to helping work out service charges, to letting shops, to opening up premises on a Saturday to help people move out of their offices so we could get the keys back. So When times are hard, I think you go in from the bottom up, and you work really hard with hunger and willingness to show that you've got what it takes, because I think there'll be very few jobs out there, and you have to really roll your sleeves up. And I think you need to get in any which way you can. And I think management is the greatest basis going to investment. And someone I've been talking to the last few days, that's what I've recommended to them. They're going to do that hopefully with my help. Next question, leases, Tony. Will there be turnover rent? Have you ever seen that with offices?
I don't think we'll ever find full turnover rent, because I think Mark can answer this question better than I can. That the landlord wants to see some base rent in order to justify his investment value, just in case the turnover rent doesn't actually do anything for him. I actually prefer an EBITDA rent rather than a turnover rent. Turnovers are very difficult to work up.
Only relevant to retail. Okay, I'm with you. Tony, I've got to ask you some more questions. We've got to move away from this. I want to know, what was your best or most enjoyable deal you were ever involved with?
The most exciting was actually being tapped on my shoulder by a mate at MIPIM 2 years ago, saying, "I've got a dilapidations negotiation for you." And I didn't even bother to actually write him a letter, because I did, I don't actively seek dilapidations negotiations, even though I'm the director of Delaps UK. And it turned out to be the Goldman Sachs deal, and I negotiated the surrender of that deal, finishing in December 2020.
Thanks, Nigel.
Where I actually set out all the numbers as to exactly what they'd pay. I actually wrote back a 20-page report saying, "Thanks for inviting me for the Delaps. I'll quote a fee of X," and then the next 20 pages were on the mathematics of how much Goldman Sachs would pay them to surrender. And I got the figure within about 7%. So that's probably the most exciting deal.
So it's probably your biggest fee, I imagine, of all time. It was a massive fee, wasn't it? Well, don't tell me the number. Don't tell anyone the number.
I don't boast about fees. I was probably underpaid for what I did.
Moving on. What was your worst deal? Would you admit to a bad deal?
My worst deal was when I was acting for the landlord of Mr. Kai restaurant in South Audley Street.
Yeah.
I got an offer from George Trevor of 105,000 a year to settle. I thought it was worth 113,000 a year, so I went to arbitration for Freddie Salem, and then a retail agent turned around, and I had the evidence of Harry's Bar directly opposite, and the retail agent said, compared with Harry's Bar, Mr. Kai is isolated, and gave me a result of 88,000 a year, and I nearly hung myself. I lost the client in the bargain, and I just got a bad result, and that was a very small one, but it really upset me, probably more than any other deal ever.
And what are your interests outside property?
Playing polo, number one.
You still play?
I play every weekend, except I've got 7 polo ponies ready to go, right? And we're still social distancing, and I can't do that. I hunt every weekend, and I jump these 6-foot hedges. I love being down at the farm, but I've only used it 2 days a week. And women, wine, socializing, good lunches, good friends, all right, skiing, shooting, and flying.
I mean, what I find amazing is the energy, enthusiasm, your sharpness. It's never seemed to change. And
well, blame Mitzi.
Good genes.
Blame Mitzi Lorenz, my mum, who used to put us to bed at 10 o'clock, go back to the factory till 3 o'clock in the morning, wake up at 7:30.
So you had the work ethic.
The work ethic was in the family. Alan, Bobby, Vanessa, and myself, we're all well into our 70s, and we are all ready to take on any challenge at any time going forward for our lifetimes. It's done for fun. It's not done. It's not work, right? It's what I do. It's fun.
I'm the same as you. I think we're probably cut from the same cloth.
Well, maybe we should. Maybe we should merge.
Or submerge. Mind you, you and Bobby are so similar. You've got it. I can see. There's a nice comment there. Will Spurs ever win a trophy? No. Let's move on. Nigel Burney, who would laugh at that point, being a Chelsea fan, is property still the best investment class? Well, Nigel, sweetheart, you're in all areas of property. If it's not, you and I are in serious trouble because you're in care homes, motor car showrooms, residential, offices, and have I missed something else that you've been in? Maybe the odd pub, but
I can tell Nigel that in 54 years, whilst there've been some worrying times, it's always come back. Right.
Well, that's the thing. That as long as you've got the patience. I mean, the worst thing that happens to me, Tony, is that do you know how many times over the years people come to say, "Why did you get me to sell that property? Why did I sell that property? Why didn't we keep that property?" I said, "I don't know. Maybe you want to take the profit. Maybe you had ideas for using the profit for lifestyle."
My answer is that at every moment in your life, we've only got three decisions. We've got yes, no, or maybe. And maybe means the either is yes or no. So why did you get him to sell the property? Because he wanted to at the time, right?
Exactly.
And that is the answer. And if everybody who I've seen who's held property, all right, and who hasn't had a liquidity problem is still very rich on it. Okay, they might take a 20 or even 30% hit on value over the next 2 years, but give it 5 years and it will come back again. And especially in central London, there's only one central London. The borders is clearly defined from Hyde Park to the west. Right, okay, you can go out to Hammersmith and this, that, and the other, but I don't call that central. And going to Tower Bridge at the east, and then you've got Marylebone Road and now King's Cross and Paddington to the north. Right, and you've got the river in Southwark and Bermondsey to the south, and there isn't enough space to accommodate all the commerce which is going to happen in what we live in, which is the best commercial city in the world, and it will come back.
But the way I see London and property, I mean, we are in obviously a very illiquid asset class, but with London being the size of it is the scale, with our tax system, and more importantly, with our legal system, it works really well. It's that they say that is our country's best asset. Then comes education, but the legal system, the trust of the legal system, coupled with that, the perception of a weak pound. And lastly, I mean, we are running out of time. We're less than 3 minutes to go. We haven't touched upon this, and it's the back of everyone's mind. Brexit. It will begin now. Well, every day it does rear its head because the government is insistent we leave at the end of the year. What are your views? Is there light at the end of the tunnel with a deal, or are we out on our backsides without a deal? And what the issues that worry me, number one, the car industry, what's left of it, with Nissan making a statement they're very worried if we don't have a deal. Will they stay here? Will they continue employing? Fishing, the fishing industry. It seems that the EU want part of our waters. I'm not sure why they should be allowed to take our fish. And let me tell you, I'm not nationalistic. I wasn't a Brexiteer. But these issues that now come up, how does the banking system work? So there are a lot of issues down the road. I mean, for you and me, the last 3 or 4 years, there's been landmines everywhere we've gone. We had a referendum, we decided to leave. I've lost count of how many general elections we've had, and new heads of the Conservative government, and then the pandemic. I mean, have you ever known so many issues to navigate around?
Funnily enough, the Brexit looked like it was going for the first time on the right track before the pandemic, and let's not forget that. I actually did vote to Brexit because I voted to renegotiate a bad deal with the club, which I thought could be done in no time. And what Boris did, if Theresa had done the same thing, we would have had Brexit sorted out in a year.
Well, I know.
All right, and the funny thing is that the property market actually traded very well through Brexit.
Tony, we're going to be locked out very,
all right,
very
then
shortly.
We go.
So what I want to say is, thank you, everyone. We've had a great bunch of questions. We've had fantastic people come in. And Tony, you are truly a legend. Thank you so much.
You're the legend.
I've had a lot of fun. a bit weary now, but
I'm
bit,
I'm very happy to do another one if there's public demand. I think it would be great.
only if there's public demand. If we hear back that people want two old whatsits to go at it again,
Codgers,
and
codgers.
codgers, friendly codgers, I call us. If you want us to come back again and give it another go, more than happy to do so. We've got a Rays of Sunshine charity lunch for 500 people, which I'll notify you on June the 25th. I'd love you all there. But Tony, God bless everyone. Thank you very much.
One last thing.
We're going now. 6,
One
5,
last thing.
4, 3.
All right. When you
2.
buy your wife online, it's not very